All right, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Connor Scotland. I am the eldest of Kathleen Scotland's grandchildren. My father is my father is Bruce, Kathleen and Brian's eldest son. My mother is Sheila. And she and my father also gave me two siblings, my sister Erin and my brother Brennan, who is not here. My siblings and I always referred to Kathleen as Kaka, so that's what I'll call her here. I grew up in Alaska and have always resided in the western US. I always lived far away from Kaka, and in many ways I wish I had been closer and spent more time with her over the last 40 years. But the time we did have together was special. Somehow the memories I carry of her feel entirely disproportionate to the number of visits we shared, which speaks to just how much she gave in even these short visits and small moments. She was a great woman who raised great children. I do wish I could have known her earlier and had the chance to spend more time with my grandfather, Brian Scotland, whom Kaka loved deeply. But Kaka always had so much to share, so much knowledge and so many stories about Brian and family and life. And because of that, I feel far more connected to my grandfather, to Ireland, and to my extended family than I otherwise would have. And I'm grateful for that. In an era when we don't even visit a neighborhood park without bringing a phone with us, it's hard not to feel humbled by a woman who left her European and ancestral home in the 1950s, crossed an ocean on the Georgic, going so far as Western Canada. That speaks to a sense of adventure, ambition, and above all, bravery. And I admire that deeply and hope the same courage and spirit pervades in my own family, the same way that many of her other characteristics do now. As a child, we always looked forward to visiting Kaka. Kaka had great houses. Early on, there was the house with the pool and the fake duck. I barely remember, but I know I was really into it. Kaka gave the duck a name. I don't recall what it was. Maybe some of you do. There was the mansion where Uncle Jack lived upstairs in his own unit. We only visited a few times, but I have such vivid, happy memories that it feels like an entire era of my childhood. That was the only time I had the pleasure of meeting the famous Uncle Thomas, who made quite the impression on me by giving me $100 when I was 12. And then there was the house with Bob with the tennis court, which was also a great place. They were all places to explore, places filled with character and warmth and a sense of adventure. One thing that I'm grateful for that we inherited from Kaka was music. My interest and love of music is a considerable part of who I am, and it all comes from my father, Bruce, who couldn't be here today. He has always been deeply in love with many kinds of music and then has had an incredible ear for great songs and great artists. He often told me he got all of that from his mother, and he was so grateful for it. And because of that, I'm grateful for it, so thank you, Kaka, for giving us that. A fond memory for me was Kaka's wedding to Bob. For us kids, it was an experience and a fun adventure, exploring the mansion again, sneaking around Uncle Jack's place, running around with Peter, Sally, Ian, Mary, and the girls. And Kaka was as fun as ever, playing the perfect host, making the occasion as full of life and warmth as she always did. As I got older, I was grateful to be able to visit her as an adult. As we all know, Kaka only seemed to shine brighter with time. No matter when we visited, she was so welcoming. Julie and I, my wife Julie, always felt so at home in her condo in Connecticut. Julie always would comment on how warm and comfortable it was, how effortlessly inviting Kaka made it feel. We had a great Christmas visit in Madison, probably almost 20 years ago. We came back in 2016, 2017, 2018. In 2020, my wife and I had our first child, Mary, and it was a joy to bring her to meet her great-grandmother 2 times over the next few years. Mary, of course, adored her and speaks of her often. Having our amazing grandmother and the whole Merkle Scotland family in this part of the country has been such a gift to us. In more recent years, Kaka and I would talk on the phone, and when she couldn't reach me, she would leave a voicemail. I still have many of these voicemails, and I'm In listening to them now, I have an appreciation for how much they capture her essence. So if you will allow me, I will share a few of these with you. Okay, one thing about Kaka is that she always said exactly what she felt. She wasn't one to hold back, especially when she had feedback to give you. About 5 years ago, I was working for Amazon as part of the Alexa project. If you don't know, Alexa is their AI assistant, the one that you can ask questions like, what's the weather? When is the Super Bowl on TV? How tall is LeBron James? That kind of thing. My team was responsible for making sure Alexa could answer those types of questions. The Merkle Scotlands were good enough to get Kaka an Alexa of her own, which meant that, lucky for me, I got to hear firsthand what she really thought of it. And let's just say she had some notes. I have a number of voicemails on this subject. I will only share one of those with you now.
Hello, darling Connor, it's your grandmother, and I'm here with a complaint about your wee Alexa. I asked her yesterday when the US Tennis Open Championship began, and she couldn't tell me. Now, this is ridiculous. This is a big thing, so you've got to do something about this wee dame, because she's not answering half my questions. But I love you anyway, and give my darling wee Judy my love, and I hope I'll see you soon again. Love you, Connor. Bye-bye, darling.
She loves me anyway. Of course, Kaka wasn't just about honesty and feedback. She was also full of love. Sometimes she would call for no other reason than to tell you that she loved you.
Hello, Connor Scotland. I love you, and I'll talk to you one of these days. I'll get you. Okay, love? Give my darling wee girl my love. Give Judy my dearest love, and I'll see you both, I hope, next year. Bye-bye, love.
And then there was Kaka's characteristic excitement whenever we were coming to visit. She made it so clear how much she looked forward to seeing us, and the feeling was mutual. She called us many, many times ahead of each visit just to share her joy.
Hello, Connor Scotland. This is your firstborn grandmother, Kathleen Scotland. Now, darling, I'm looking forward to seeing you at the weekend, and I hear you won't be until about midnight Friday night. So I'll have all the lights on waiting for you, and your bed will be there, cozy and cozy, whichever you like, and everything you need. And I'll leave out bowls of fruit or whatever you need for you, but I'll be up to welcome you. Love you both, and safe journey, and I'm so happy you're coming. We're going to have that. You're going to be doing a lot of bird watching. You're going to get when I say the basics of sailing, and you're going to get lots of hugs and kisses from your grandmother. And I love you and Julie. So looking forward to seeing you. Bye-bye, darling. God bless.
I have many more of these messages, and these little recordings of her voice to me are something I cherish. They remind me of who she was, completely unfiltered, always warm, always full of life, and I'm grateful to have them. Kaka lived a remarkable life. She carried history with her. Not just stories of the past, but values, an experience of adventure, and an unmistakable presence that left a lasting mark on all of us. She gave us connection to our family, to roots, to music, to tradition, to values of warmth and welcome, and I'm grateful for all of it. Thank you, Kaka.
It's going to be hard. Okay. I'm going to say a few words about our Kaki, but she was so many things to so many people that she loved, including Kaka to my cousins and Auntie Kate to our other relatives. I know that she lived so many eras in her life, but to me, it felt like she was born to be a grandmother. To her, showing her grandchildren love was giving us anything we possibly could have wanted. She spoiled us rotten. Want to watch TV for 8 hours? No problem. She'll deliver you breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the couch. When my parents weren't around, all bets were off. She'd give you whatever you want, even if she didn't think it was good for you. I remember one time I was staying with her when I was about 6 years old, and I was just learning how delicious McDonald's is. And I remember eating at least 2 Happy Meals, and then I got sick. And she told me, "Of course you're sick. You ate too much food." And I haven't had a McDonald's burger since. Kaki lived for Christmas, a holiday about Jesus where you give gifts to the people you love. She started Christmas shopping in July every year. Shopping was an activity we all did together, and she definitely passed her skills on. I'm 30 years old, and I get a rush when I walk into every store. And when I shop, I can't help but shop for myself and any person I care about. Much to my mother's dismay, I always spend my last dollar on other people because that's what my grandma always did for me. She was herself for so long, and I feel so lucky that we had her for all that time. When she was 90 and got in a car accident and hit a tree, she kept saying how her car took off like a rocket. We all thought that this was the beginning of the end and that she was starting to lose it. It turns out that her car had a recall for a bad accelerator, and it did in fact take off like a rocket. When she was 91, we went shopping for a new car. She wanted a Honda CR-V at a particular price, and the salesman offered her the car in light blue at that price. She said it had to be the red car, because Brian and I bought a car that color years ago, and I thought I hated it, but I turned out to love it, and it makes me think of him. So we paid extra for the red car so she could drive around and think of Brian. I remember when I was younger, figuring out who I was, I thought I'd have to wait to get married until after my grandparents died. Of course, I didn't count on Kaki living forever. And I never talked to Kaki about being gay because I was too afraid that she might reject me. And I didn't want to risk losing all that love that she gave me. But when Jasmine and I were getting more serious, my dad had talked to her. And she called me up and she said, "Tell me about your girlfriend. Does she make you happy?" And since then, she would ask about Jasmine on every call. But I really knew she'd welcome her to the family when she asked me what Jasmine wanted for Christmas. And I feel so fortunate and grateful that at 96, she traveled down to Philadelphia to be at our wedding. Kaki always had the last laugh. She'd give you a scare and then come back fighting every time. After she had a big fall at 95, my dad had called and said, according to the doctors, she only had a few hours to live. So I left school in a panic, and Amy and I drove up to Philadelphia playing God Save the Queen. We got to the hospital, and she's sitting up in bed, thrilled to see us, and says, "What are you doing here?" I'm sad to tell you that I've only recently learned that I was not Kaki's only favorite grandchild. She always told me that I was, and that it was a secret, don't tell anybody else. I believed it every time, and I still do. But it turns out she's been telling the others they're her favorite too. But one thing for me is always true. She is my favorite. My dad is going to thank everyone who helped Kaki make it this long along the way, like her caregivers and Marlene and their friends who they couldn't have done it without, which is true. But I want to thank my parents, who spent the last decade making sure that Kaki had everything she needed. She didn't always make it easy for them, but I always knew she would be okay because she had them. A few months ago, I told her, "Thanks for loving me so well, Kaki, and teaching me what unconditional love is." And she responded, "You made it easy." Khaki gave me everything in the world that I ever could have asked for, but at the end of the day, her love was the greatest gift of them all. Hello, I'm Maeve. I'm Ian's third daughter, if you don't know me. I'm going to keep this brief, but I wanted to share a story about how Khaki made me into who I am today. When she first moved to Guilford, I remember she was pretty unhappy upon arrival. This was after she was in York, Pennsylvania. She moved up here with a lot of change, and she was doing all she could to make the apartment into her new home. One afternoon, I was over there stuffing my face with birthday cake Oreos and root beer that she had given me, and going through all her stuff like I always did. She had unpacked numerous bins full of paintings and other craft supplies to the point that she could have opened her own art supplies store. And we decided to paint together. The two of us sat down at her kitchen table and painted the pond and the forest that was in the view of her kitchen windows. And painting with her was always an activity that made both of us so frustrated because neither of us were happy with our thing looking quite like we wanted. But somehow she always had this way of telling me that my work was so great and she made me feel like I had genuine talent. I found that painting while we were going through all her stuff recently, actually. And it stood out to me because she had cherished it for so long, and she was so proud of me when it was done. I vividly remember her reaction when I showed her. And I still think it's ugly, but her creativity is always in me, and I know she is the reason that art is so important as an outlet for me. So, thanks, Kak.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm Jane. I'm the youngest of Ian's daughters and the youngest of Kaki's grandchildren. And being the youngest, my relationship with Kaki was a little bit different than my older siblings. I spent more time watching her decline and taking care of her and a little less time shopping. This winter break, I spent a lot of time with Kaki, giving her caretaker Marlene a much needed break. 2 days after New Year's, I was with Kaki when I asked her what her goals were for the new year. She responded, "My number one goal is to find a stick and beat you with it." For reference, she also thought we were in the midst of an earthquake. We were not. This brought me back to years of visiting Kaki when she would repeat the exact same threat while simultaneously feeding us candy and loving on us. In the depths of adolescence, when sarcasm was the only language I spoke, Kaki matched my sass and made sure to give back exactly what I gave. It is in this way that I learned sass from my grandmother. Kaki's humor became my humor, and her turns of phrases color my language. So know that when I give you a hard time, it's Kaki who taught me. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
Oh, wow. All right. I don't know how I can follow those. I knew that there was going to be lots of great stories ahead of me that were really meaningful. And I thought, what I really ought to do is talk about my mom's long life and sort of recap it a bit. She had a long life, and really she lived it well. And as AC said, she had great qualities that we could all learn from. The importance of family, Her family was just so important, and she made a real effort to stay in touch with all of us. And so to that end, I have to thank all of you who've journeyed so far to be here. We have, cousins from England. We have Canadians, California, Oregon, Montana. So thank you to all of you, Maine, who came, and Kaki would be really deeply touched by that. She also was a really good friend and had a lot of friends that throughout her life, in the various chapters of her life, that she stayed in touch with over the years. That's not been something I've always been that good at, and I really aspire to be a better friend and stay in touch. She also had her faith that was always guided her, and always, of course, her sense of humor, her wit. So she had a long life at 98, but what was impressive is that she changed as those 98 years went on. She was not the same person. That was my mother, as was the grandchildren. They got lucky. There were roughly, I would say, 7 chapters of her life, her 98 years. So let's get the last chapter out of the way first, which is really sort of an epilogue. The last 2 years were the most difficult for my mom, and she didn't leave this life easily. When my dad died in '87, my brother Bruce, who sadly cannot be with us today, read a poem at my dad's funeral that left an imprint on me. And it's by Dylan Thomas, and it went, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. The wise men at their end know that the dark is right. Because their words had forked no lightning," well, actually my mom's did have some words that forked lightning, "do not go gentle into that good night." And she didn't. Although she died peacefully on the couch, but she really, we thought she had died a few times, as the girls said. So to that end, some big thank yous are due for those who also helped. So Lisa Conway, who is here, thank you for all your effort with my mom. She was also a great friend to my mom, but then also was there at times it wasn't so easy. Lisa Nardi, who is also here, thank you. Jennifer Coyle as well. Maria Keogh chipped in. Mom's first care worker, his name was Carlene, and she was really good. And then Marlene, after Carlene, Marlene Ebanks, Bolt Ebanks, was unbelievable. I mean, Marlene was just, for over a year, put up with my mom when she wasn't easy, but also brought the best out in my mom in many ways, yet kept her really healthy and eating. So big thank you to her. Also, thanks to all our friends and family who chipped in many ways, to my girls, who would get sucked into, voluntold is a phrase that we have in our family, to do stuff. My Uncle Thomas, who was always there, also at our side. And then other just friends that would pop in and say hello. And so that's the end, that's that chapter. On to chapter 1. So we have to do a preface. My mom's mother, Flory, was one of 13 children. And these 13 children were close. And they were real supports to each other during, sort of the end of World War I, the start of World War II. Wasn't an easy time in Ireland. And they were hilarious buddies. I mean, the stories that I remember my grandmother, Flory, telling about the things they would do to each other were unbelievable. About like buckets falling on heads and things like that. And so my mom was born into that, and so had this closeness and importance of family ingrained into her. So when her father died at age 6 or 7, it was really difficult. And she was sent to a boarding school in Dublin called the Masonic School. And anybody who spent any time with my mother got stories about her time in Masonic school, and you just sort of like, here she goes again. But at the same time, it was good. And it was really a time for her where she learned a lot. She learned a lot about music and played the violin, apparently, the piano. She was very good at the piano and received a good education. She also grew up during the war years and had an appreciation for the scarcity that she had during the war years. She would tell stories about having coupons to get things, and she also would regale us with stories of hiding under the kitchen table during the bombing raids in Northern Ireland, and her uncle giving them brandy to help them make it through the adventure, which I think they liked. So that was that. And then in February 1949, she married my father, William Bryan Scotland. And then my brother Bruce, the eldest, was born in September 1950, and Peter was born in January of 62. And so after they got married, quite a few relatives had emigrated to Canada from Ireland because I guess prospects weren't that great. And my dad had a respected uncle, Jim, who encouraged my dad and his brother, Jack, to seek their fortune abroad. And so my dad talked my mother into it, and they went. So this starts chapter 2 of her life, I would put that as, which was emigrating to Canada and then moving around Canada a fair bit. We were talking about this at dinner last night. Imagine Calgary, Alberta in 1955, was like a cow town. Like it was this small outpost, in the mountains. And my mom was from Bangor, Northern Ireland, which is this lovely little seaside town with cute buildings. And it was, and parks and lovely shops. And it must have been a complete shock to my mother. My dad went first, and then Mom followed with the boys. As Connor said, she took a ship. They arrived in the ship in New York, and then from New York, did they go to New York? I'm not sure. And then they took a train all the way to Alberta. And I bet when Mom got there, Dad got an earful. But she did not enjoy Calgary. She didn't speak highly those times, and I think it was a heck of a shock. So then subsequently, there was a thing that they moved every few years for Dad's work, and so they moved to Ontario, which was much better, and they lived in a farm in London, Ontario, and a couple other houses, I think. And then, and that was hard because they moved around a fair amount, and thankfully, they had family in Canada. Lynn and Hazel, close cousins, lived in Ontario and or Quebec as well. So that ends chapter 2 because chapter 3 is really them moving to Canada, to the USA. They moved to Milwaukee in 1962, and that was where then in 64 they moved to Skinny Atlas, New York, and that's when they had me. That was a real change for the positive, I would say. And then we came back to Milwaukee in 67. But that time in Milwaukee, they stayed until 79. So it was really their first long time anywhere in the US. And I've talked to my brother Bruce about this, about the fact that they moved so much and that it was a struggle. So they, from 67 to 79, they lived in Milwaukee. And Mom made a bunch of great friends that she stayed in touch with over the years, and that's when she started the antique business. So my mom found this, I think it was the Salvation Army, that would have antiques in it. And she would go into the Salvation Army, they'd be like, that's Royal Worcester. That's sterling silver, these earrings. And so she and cousin Lynn would get talking, they'd realize, well, what if we got this stuff and sold it? So they kind of started that going, and then chapter 4 started. We moved to York, Pennsylvania. Dad got a job in York, and then we moved from 1979 to 87 in York, Pennsylvania. And that's where the antique stuff really took off. So Mom would go to, she would basically go to 20 to 30 garage sales in a weekend. And she would have a list, right? And Friday night, she would be writing out the list. And sometimes Lynn would come down from Canada, her cousin, but this was like a business, right? And so she was serious. And you had to be out the door. If you were going to go with her, you had to be ready to go out the door at 6:30 a.m. She'd be at their doors at 7, and she would clean up, right? Since you would ride back home with all these antiques. And then she would take them to Canada to be sold. And the trunk of my mom's car would be loaded down, and we'd be driving through the customs, and the car would be like this, and they would say, "Do you have anything to declare?" And my mom would, "No, love, nothing to declare, nope." And I was like freaking out because I was sure that we were going to get searched and that they were going to discover all this stuff, and there was going to be some big problem. My mom would end up in jail, and I'd be like an orphan. But no, she always got through, and then she took them to Lynn's house, and then Lynn would they would price the stuff together, and then took them to this inn called the Pillar and Post in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and that was like the most glee I ever saw in my mom when she and Lynn were doing that. It was great. It was really a neat time for my mom, and so that was great. Then the grandchildren started with Connor. That started a new chapter in my mom's life that she kind of blossomed into. Dad died in 1987, and Mom had to live alone, which was hard on her and us because we got lots of phone calls, but it was also good for her in a way because she also became her own person more, and she, I think, got more self-confidence. She wasn't always under the shadow of Brian. She had to sort of live on her own, and I think that was something in her life that got her just sort of things, caused change in her life, and in a way that was a good thing that came from that terrible event. And then the next chapter would be chapter 5, from 1988 to 2013. She moved around York a bit. She was in the mansion that Connor remembers, which was a condo, and then my Uncle Jack was in the condo above, so it was a nice sense of family there. And then she married again to her doctor, who also went to church. Bob McDougall was his name, and during that time, she really, then Mary and I had Anne Claire, and then Amy shortly after. Well, actually, before she married Bob, we had them, and she put a lot of energy into being a grandmother, and Aaron was there at the same time as well. And she was just amazing. Anne Claire mentioned about Christmas. She would start shopping, and she said July. I would actually say February. And worked hard to make it as much fun as possible. We did a lot of 6-hour drives to York, Pennsylvania from Connecticut during that time. We would arrive at midnight or 1 a.m. and she would have a fresh batch of ginger snap cookies with icing on top, and then plates of candies to refresh my tired children, and eventually 4. So to that end, we're going to have a reception downstairs, and there will be ginger snaps and candies. There will be tea and the cookie sandwiches with no crusts. And then Bob passed, and then Mom moved here when she was 88 years old. That was a big change to move here at 88. But she went to church here, found another chapter of PEO, which was a source of great friends, and made some good friends here. Found all the local branches of TJ Maxx. All the managers of the TJ Maxx's got bonuses that year because they thought that they were doing a great job managing their stores. In fact, it was just my mother's arrival. And even then she ratcheted up to hit the full grandmother mode. There's one story I need to tell about her and grandmother mode, and which was, so we got a dog named Dash, and Dash was about just under a year, and Dash found all the ponds and puddles in the neighborhood. And Dash came in through the back door one day wet, and our next door neighbor had a koi pond, where koi are these like fancy fish, and he wasn't very nice to start off with. But then on top of it, my dog went in his koi pond and hurt the lily pads and scared the fish. She didn't hurt the fish, but she probably wanted to make friends with him. So Dash came home wet. The neighbor called the animal control. Animal control arrives at our door. Mom somehow knew it was animal control, knocking at the door, and says, "I can't come to the door. I'm elderly and I have a heart condition." And that scared him off. So maybe she had to say it a couple times, but the elderly and the heart condition was too much. And so that kind of, was just a great story about my mom's spirit and how much fun she was. So she lived her life well, and may we all be more like Kaki, that we may all learn to love better, be a better friend, grow as we age, and keep our humor going throughout it all. So there you go. Thanks.